Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this session on our EMP-A participants' presentations. We're starting off the second part with clues. So please, can I call up Philip to present his clue study? And if I may, can I also ask the EAE presenter, the NISMOD is online, and microgrids presenter to come up as well and sit behind so we can have a pipeline of presenters. Right, and with that, Philip, all yours.
All right, good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Philip from Ghana, and I'm here to present on CLUES, Exploring Sustainable Pathways for Ghana, a CLUES-based system model. Ghana, you all know, one of the West African countries, also faced with several problems, and some of them are unreliable energy supply, limited access to water and sanitation services, high dependence on traditional biomass, climate-related vulnerabilities, such as drought, floods, and soil erosion. And as part of our energy transition policies, we want to achieve 10% non-hydro renewable energy by 2030. And with that, Ghana's energy mix, we want, with a key assumption of a significant investment in grid-connected solar PVs. And we also want to look at how will the system be impacted considering climate change projections affecting rainfalls and crop yields. And this was my CLUES reference framework. Under energy, I consider the main energy sources in Ghana, that's gas power plants, hydro power plants, and solar PV. Then I also made some provisions for biomass power plants, wind farms, and then coal power plants. In the land, I considered maize crops, cassava, cocoa, oil palm for biofuel, forests, made some forest reservations for forest, water bodies, built up lands, and some land was also reserved for other use. And the water, I considered precipitation, irrigation, evapotranspiration, runoffs, and then groundwater. And of course, I considered some emissions in the framework. And then these were the scenarios we considered. We considered 3 scenarios. The baseline scenario, that's business as usual, which reflects our current trends, policies, and technologies without any significant interventions. And the key assumptions were continued reliance on biomass and fossil fuels, gradual expansion of electricity access, no major climate mitigation or adaptation measures implemented. Then I considered achieving our 10% non-hydro renewable energy by 2030 with a significant investment in grid-connected off-grid solar PV systems. I also looked at net zero in the energy sector by 2050 as part of a long-term climate strategy. With this, I'll consider rapid scale-up of renewable energy, that's solar and wind, for electricity generation. Now to the results. On the first scenario, the achieving 10% renewable energy, for our energy production, we can see a significant investment in natural gas, which is our main source of. So currently, Ghana gets about 59% of our energy from gas power plants, and then 39% from hydro. And then on the 10% by 2030, we see a significant, a gradual introduction of solar from now, that's 2025 to 2030, then it continues gradually. This will have a significant impact on our emission and also on our land, because it's solar, we have to consider land for solar. And with the emissions, there wasn't any really significant impact because the difference was just about 1 million tons of emissions if we have to achieve the 10% renewable energy by 2030. And then to the net zero scenario in our energy sector, energy production, comparing the net zero production, you see a significant investment in solar and then wind, And then with the mission, yes, Ghana can achieve that, but we will have to do a lot of investment, wind and then solar. So for here, the emissions that were considered were just agricultural, emission from agricultural machinery, and then fossil fuels. Conclusions and policy insights. The baseline model shows that Ghana's current development strategy is unsustainable, with rising pressure on energy resources and increased carbon emissions. Net zero by 2050 will require some major energy system shifts, electrification, and land use reforms. 10% renewable energy by 2030, excluding hydro, is achievable but may create some land and water trade-offs. Policy insights, there should be some cross-sectoral planning. This will be critical to meet sustainability and climate goals. Prioritize non-hydro renewables through incentives and grid upgrades and local industry. Net zero pathway needs clean technology deployment, efficiency, and nature-based solutions. Actually, this particular work is not ending here. It's a closed model, and I intend to also look at the impact of this renewable transition on our land use and then our water systems, which will later, the work will be refined to include that, and also the cost. And we'll also be looking at the integration of socioeconomic impact and also refine climate inputs to capture effect on crops, water, and hydropower. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. As what we did before, we will leave questions to the end of this block. So we'll move on now to EAE with Naraja.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Neerja, and I currently work here in Ethiopia. I'm going to share a case study on how we've used the Energy Access Explorer to understand energy potential around rural agri-centers here in Ethiopia. To give a bit of a context, in Ethiopia, the industry demand for energy has been increasing over the years, as you can see on the graph to the right of this presentation. And it is estimated that from this year to about 2030, the energy demand from industries would increase by about 11% every year. So this necessitates us to understand how we can supply energy for such demand. In this case study, I've used Energy Access Explorer to understand how energy potential can be assessed around rural transformation centers, which I will shortly explain what it means. For the context, Ethiopia has four large agri-processing industries in 4 different locations, namely in the south, central, west, and in the north. And they span areas from about 100 to about 250 hectares of land, and they're used to understand how they can enable industrialization in some of these locations. The energy demand or the energy capacity of some of these centers are very high, so that's not much of the focus of this case study. In terms of the rural transformation centers, the model suggests that around 100-kilometer radius of each of these agro-processing industries, the proposal is to have rural transformation centers that will enable basic processing and initial processing of agro products or poultry or meat transfer from the rural areas to the agro industries. And like I said, they're located at a radius of about 100 kilometers. Around these 4 agro-processing industries, currently there are 26 rural agri-centers, some that are already operational and running, some that are yet to come into existence. There are a number of challenges why some of them are not operational, and one of the challenges is access to reliable power, which is what this case study analyzes. There are 3 scenarios that I've taken into account. The first is to understand existing grid infrastructure around these rural transformation centers. The second is to understand solar energy potential, and finally to understand the wind energy potential. This is a broad methodology of how EAE was used for this case study. Initially, we started by sourcing data. Most of the data has been acquired from public sources, except for the IAIP and the rural centers. We had to map them and understand how to locate them on the map. And the second one was to layer selection and apply some threshold. So for both solar and wind, we've applied a threshold to understand what would be an optimum case to consider it as a good energy potential. And then comes the analysis and output. These are some of the major key findings. As you can see in the first graph, it shows some of the distribution lines with 33 kV ones that have been considered for industrial use. And they all are lying very close to some of the rural transformation centers. But one of the challenges we understand from literature and expert interactions is reliability is not so great. And therefore, although in some of the social assessments of these rural centers, it is recommended to connect them to the nearest grid, sometimes the feasibility is not so great. And that's why the second scenario considers solar potential. And as you can see in some of the pale yellow areas, those are areas with very high solar energy potential. And some of the dots, which represent the rural centers, also fall on these areas. So this could be a good consideration. And from the analysis, it showed that 9 rural centers have a high potential to leverage the solar. The third scenario is to understand wind. And in wind's case as well, if you can see the pale yellow and orange areas in the legend, they represent areas with very high wind speed. And many of the rural centers also fall within this purview. Based on this analysis and all the criteria we've applied, 10 out of the 26 rural agri centers have been qualified as something that can be considered for either solar or wind energy potential. And also in line with the National Electrification Plan and current high reliance on hydropower in Ethiopia, it would be really nice to diversify because that's also part of expanding the off-grid energy access here in Ethiopia. In terms of the strengths and limitations, the EAE tool itself offers a lot of strengths, majorly how we can look at multiple data sets. As in this case, we've looked at solar, wind, existing substation, grid lines, livestock, and crop productivity, and so on, and understand how all of them can be taken into account for the analysis. However, there are 2 key limitations I'd like to highlight. The first one, the rural centers, I am not aware of the demand in terms of power. That data is not available for all the 26 rural centers. It's only available for a few for which social assessments have been carried out. And the second is, as much as the Energy Access Explorer helps us understand how what are the energy potential and how energy access can be enabled for some of these centers, it would be really helpful to overlay it with other tools like Onset and FinPlan to be able to materialize the implementation. In terms of final takeaways, I'd like to highlight 3 key points. One is grid proximity alone is not probably sufficient. It's important for us to assess the reliability as well. The second is how decentralized solutions for some of these rural centers can be considered through solar and wind potential, and the integration could be in multiple ways. Compared to some of the large industrial facilities, the rural centers have a much lower demand, and therefore it could be considered for solar and wind. And the third is, as mentioned, the EAE tool independently really helps us only understand which kind of energy potential and access we can enable, but it needs to be coupled with other tools that will give us better implementation strategies. With that, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you so much, Alamayo, for all the support in the training. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Niraja. Thank you, Niraja. Now we've got Caleb, who will represent Microgrid's PI.
Good morning. My name is Azindo Caleb. I work with the Energy Commission of Ghana. And today my presentation is on designing the least cost mini-grid solution for the Lala community of Ghana. So the electrification rate or access rate of Ghana as at 2023 is 88.8%. And within this, we have 2.1 that is made up of modern forms of renewable energy. And this is the target of the country to increase that to 10% by the end of 2030. Now, these communities or these areas that are not electrified are mainly off-grid communities, and in some of the policy documents, the recommendation is that off-grid, mini-grid should be the solution for these places because grid extension wouldn't make economic sense. So I selected a community called the Lala community, which is on an island in the Bono East region of Ghana. It has a population of 562. Now, why this community? Ghana have selected certain sites to benefit from mini-grids, and this community is one of them. Now, my main research question is to get the most cost-effective mini-grid system that will be suitable for this community. Now, I use the RAM tool to get the energy profile of the community, so taking into consideration the energy needs of the community, looking at the appliances and their usage over the period. Now you can see that the load profile on your screen, you realize that there's peak during the morning in the evening because there's usually no productive use in this community because it's a farming community. And with farming, they just live in the morning to their farm and come back in the evening. So it's only in the evening and mornings where there's always high demand. So I also envision that as the years go by, there'll be increase in terms of energy needs. There'll be appliances that will be included, and sometimes also some productive use such as cold freeze, because this community that I selected is a fishing community. Now I run this model in microgrid SPI, and I'm using two scenarios. Currently, mini grid development in Ghana focuses on no capacity expansion, meaning that they look at the sizes for like 5 years, and they look at the capacity for the 5th year and the sizes for the 1st to the 5th. So you realize that once that is done, the 1st year, you are generating more than the community actually needs. And with my model, I try to look at the penetration of IRE in it. So I made a constraint from 70% to no constraint on it. Then when we move to the capacity expansion, I envision that in the 3rd year, there will be increase in terms of appliance use and also the inclusion of productive use, which is the cold storage, that is the freezing. When you look at the chart on your screen, right, that I am comparing the penetration of IRE for the no capacity expansion with that of the capacity expansion. And you realize that as the penetration of renewable energy increases, the levelized cost of electricity also increases. And comparing the two, you realize that the levelized cost of electricity for the capacity expansion makes economic sense as compared to the no capacity expansion as a result of the planning to increase the demand, but rather increases the demand right from the onset. So no new generation is added for the no capacity expansion. This is a chart just for you to appreciate the capacity expansion scenario. So on the first column to my left, right, that the 1st year the system will be a 42 kilowatt system. But as time goes on, in the 3rd year, you have to increase it to 59 because the population will increase, and so will the demand also increase. Now, in conclusion, reality in Ghana showed that no capacity expansion has proven to be fatal, and therefore capacity expansion model is best solution for designing mini grids in Ghana. Also looking at Ghana considering 10% of modern forms of renewable energy as a target by 2030. The government will have to provide certain subsidies such that, as the renewable energy penetration increases, the levelized cost of electricity also increases. And in order to find a balance, there will have to be incentives so that these locals in this community will be able to afford. Because that will be the point, to give them power that they cannot afford to pay. Now, in future work, Ghana currently does not have a regulatory framework for mini grid development, and therefore, with insights from this modeling tool, we will help shaping this, as well as also provide some financial models such as phase investments that will also be looked at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yes, so my name is Nancy Bansa. I'm from Ghana, and I took part in the NISMOD climate resilience course. And for my project, I was looking at a climate risk assessment for road infrastructure, Ghana in focus. So for Ghana, our current population is around 35 million, and 58.6% of this population is actually urban. And our major form of transportation is by road. Over 90% of our goods and passengers are moved by road. And because of our location and how close we are to the coast, we actually have our neighboring countries like Burkina, Niger, and some other parts in the northern parts of the sub-Saharan, moving their goods as well from our ports. So that puts a lot of traffic on our roads. And that is also a good source of income for the country. So these are some of the challenges we face. Floods. We've had situations where roads have been washed away. We've had situations where drains have been blocked and vehicles have been carried away, leading to loss of lives and damage to other infrastructure and then loss of capital. So in this project, I tried to look at some of the systems or assets that would be analyzed. And in this case, I was looking at environmental and then climate data, and then try to look at geotechnical and hydrogeological assets. But because of time, most of what I could do was more of the hydrological assets with a little bit of the climate. And for roads, not being able to access goods and services, not being able to reach healthcare or get access to education, and then other emergency response, that makes us want to make sure that we have good infrastructure that are resilient, especially in the face of climate change, so that we are prepared ahead of time for such things. And then as a country that is one of the leading countries when it comes to cocoa growth, and most of these cocoa farms are in the rural areas. So you want to make sure that you're able to move your goods from those rural areas into the urban cities where these are then exported out of the country. And so this is a map of the road network and then some health facilities within the country. You see that we have a lot of health facilities dotted, but then access, if cut off, then becomes a problem. Even though it's heavily centered around the urban areas, but at least within some parts, you want to make sure that those people would be able to have access to these health points when the time comes. And so with some of the results, this chart actually shows some flood depths, then the frequencies of these flood depths, using return periods of 1 in 100 years. And then this is for RCP 2050. And then we looked at the historical scenario as well. Then these are some flood maps, also using return periods of 50 years, 100 years, and try to look at historical. So historical 50 years, and then 100 years of return periods. Then we try to look at scenarios, RCP4, for 100-year return period, and then 50-year return period is for 2030. And then we try to look at 2050, also looking at some scenarios, 100 years return period, and then 50 years return period. So these are some flood maps as well. And then in terms of national policies and strategic priorities, realize that there are plans in place to make sure that we have climate resilient infrastructure, and then trying to make sure that the transportation system, so different policies trying to put together in connection with the sustainable development goals, so that as a nation we'll be able to achieve the goal of maintaining our infrastructure. And so I feel it's important that some of these things we're able to really analyze them and then be able to make informed decisions when it comes to some of these at the national level. And so for future works, as a geotechnical engineer, I would then now want to, now that I've had a fair idea of what the hydrological side looks like, I would now want to incorporate the geotechnical aspect, which is more of the soil part, to gather more data, which is a little bit tricky here. So still gathering some soil data so I can perform further analysis, then look at cost components as well, and see how this can now be fused into some of these national policies that the country has in mind. And these are some of the references I leveraged on. And I'll say a very big thank you to my facilitators, Tom and Sylvia. And thank you very much for listening to me.